It started with a call that didn't sound like much. A hiker, a forgotten road, a rusted car deep in the woods. That's how most cold cases wake up quietly. No headlines, no screaming sirens, just a few words spoken through static that change everything. Welcome to Uncommon Stories. If this story stays with you, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and when the truth found you. Now let's begin. It started with a call that didn't sound like much. A hiker, a forgotten road, a rusted car deep in the woods. That's how most cold cases wake up, quietly. No headlines, no screaming sirens, just a few words spoken through static that change everything. It was October 2006 when the dispatcher patched it through. A man named Eli Barnes, mid-40s, seasonal camper, said he'd been exploring the Glacier Ridge backcountry when he found something old off a service road. The way he said old caught my ear like it meant more than age. I'd been with the Flathead County Sheriff's Department for 23 years. Most days were property disputes, missing hikers, or the occasional bear incident. But that morning, the forest felt different, like it had been holding its breath for a very long time. The GPS ping placed Barnes nearly 7 miles north of an abandoned ranger station, a place the locals called Dead Mile, because radio signals died there, and so did a few careless hunters. The storm from the night before had dropped a sheet of early snow. By the time I reached the trailhead, the temperature was dropping fast and daylight felt thin, that washed-out gray that makes time feel slow. Barnes was waiting by his truck, boots caked in mud, eyes wide like someone who'd seen a ghost he wasn't sure he believed in. He pointed east through the trees. About a half-mile that way. It's buried good. You wouldn't see it unless you fell into it. The woods swallowed sound as we moved. Branches snapped underfoot, and mist drifted between the trunks like smoke. When I finally saw the glint of metal through the pines, I stopped cold, a car or what was left of one, wedged nose down in a shallow ravine, nearly overtaken by moss and roots. The color was hard to tell, probably blue once, now the green of lichen and time. The license plate was half-eaten by rust, but the first few numbers were clear enough for me to recognize. It was a Montana plate from 1994. That year meant something. Every detective in this county knew it. The Miller case. Father and daughter gone missing on a camping trip near this very ridge. No vehicle ever found. No remains. Just a headline that haunted local papers for a decade. 2 vanished in the pines, no trace found. I felt the old chill crawl up my spine. 12 years gone, and now a single piece of metal was whispering they might have never left at all. We called it in. Forensics would take hours to reach us. So I climbed down alone, careful not to disturb the undergrowth. The car was a 1993 Ford Bronco, windows shattered, doors fused with corrosion. The forest had been patient. It had wrapped the thing in roots like a secret it was proud to keep. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and old soil. I swept my flashlight across the dash. The key was still in ignition. The glove box resisted, then gave. Inside, an old road map folded twice, a faded Polaroid of a little girl holding a fishing pole, and a motel receipt dated June 12, 1994. Check-in name, Daniel Miller. In the back seat, something small caught the light. A child's shoe read, "Its laces gone." The kind parents buy before school starts, hoping their kid won't outgrow it too fast. The sight of it pressed a weight down on my chest I didn't know I still carried. 12 years ago, I'd worked that search. I was a younger cop then, fresh from training, all fire and optimism. We combed the ridges for days, helicopters, dogs, volunteers. We found nothing. No tire tracks, no campfire, not even footprints. It was like the forest had eaten them whole. The case went cold in 96. I boxed the file myself. Now, kneeling beside that car, I realized the forest hadn't swallowed them. It had been hiding them. When forensics arrived, we taped off the area and started the slow work. Soil samples, photos, tagging every scrap of evidence. I kept circling back to the Polaroid, the girl, Lily Miller, 8 years old at the time, was smiling, gap-toothed, holding up a trout half her size. Her father, Daniel, wasn't in the picture, but you could see his shadow on the ground beside her. The way it leaned, you could tell he was proud. But what chilled me wasn't the image. It was what was written on the back in faint pencil. Cabin by the water, July. That single line didn't match the date on the motel receipt. The Millers were reported missing in June. So why a note about July? I pocketed a photocopy for myself, unofficially. Some things you need to hold on to before they get lost in evidence chains and bureaucracy. By sunset, the Bronco was winched out of the ravine. The forest felt uneasy, not hostile, but alert, like it knew we'd taken something that belonged to it. Back at the station, we logged everything, but one detail gnawed at me. The car hadn't been there long. The undergrowth underneath was broken, the soil unsettled. The moss on the roof was too fresh, meaning someone had moved it recently. I pulled the old case file from archives. The cover smelled like dust and failure. Missing persons: Daniel Miller, 37. Lily Miller, 8. Last seen June 10th, 1994, leaving Whitefish, Montana, for a 3-day camping trip. Daniel's wife, Claire, had filed a report when they didn't return Sunday night. The search ran 2 weeks, until weather and funding shut it down. No foul play established. Case status: closed, presumed dead. Claire remarried in 1999 and moved to Idaho. I wondered if she wanted to call, if she'd even want to open that door again. But duty isn't about comfort. It's about truth. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady. But when I said the words "we found the car," the silence that followed was the kind that changes a person. She said she'd come up the next morning. After hanging up, I sat alone in the evidence room, staring at that Polaroid under the flickering fluorescent light. The handwriting on the back, it wasn't Daniel's. In the old file, I'd seen his camping logs and insurance forms. His writing was tight, neat, left tilted. This was wider, rounder, almost hesitant. It looked like a child's. Maybe Lily had written it herself. Maybe she was alive when that note was written. Maybe July wasn't the end. It was a beginning no one ever saw. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of wind to the trees outside my window sounded too much like whispers. I kept thinking of the car, the shoe, the photo of father and daughter frozen in time. 12 years of silence, broken by accident, or maybe not accident at all. Because deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had moved that Bronco for a reason. Not to hide it, but to make sure it would finally be found. And if that was true, then the story of the Millers wasn't over. It was just beginning to speak again. Claire Miller arrived before sunrise. I'd expected hesitation, maybe even tears. Instead, she stepped out of her rental car like someone who'd already survived the worst thing life could do to her. Her hands trembled slightly, though, when I showed her the Polaroid. "That's her," she whispered. "That's my Lily. I took that photo 2 days before they left." Her eyes lingered on the edges of the picture. "But that writing, that's not mine. You recognize it?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. Lily was learning cursive then, but Daniel never let her write on the backs of photos. He said it ruined them. She paused. "Why would it say July?" "That's what I was hoping you could help me figure out." We walked toward the evidence garage, where the Bronco sat under a tarp. Claire hesitated at the door. "I want to see it," she said softly, "but not alone." The moment I pulled the cover back, the smell of earth and rust filled the air. She covered her mouth. The windshield was shattered, the interior coated in soil and pine needles. She pressed her hand against the door handle, then drew back like it had burned her. "This is where they were?" I nodded. "We're not sure for how long, but someone moved it. Recently." Her expression hardened. "Why?" "That's what I intend to find out." Later that morning, the lab report came in. No skeletal remains in or around the vehicle. No traces of blood. 2 sets of fingerprints, Daniels and one unidentified adult male. The second set didn't match anyone in the national database. But it was the dirt sample from under the Bronco that caught my eye. The soil contained traces of diesel and sawdust, not typical for that area of the forest. A logging operation, maybe, or something older. I called the forestry department. They told me the nearest active logging site was 20 miles east, but there had been an unregistered private logging road in the mid-90s, closed in 97, never mapped. Its entrance, they said, was somewhere near where the Bronco had been found. That meant Daniel and Lily might have driven onto a road that didn't officially exist, and someone else, maybe whoever built it, might have been there too. By noon, I drove back toward Glacier Ridge, Claire in the passenger seat. She stared out the window at the endless curtain of pine. I remember him saying he wanted to take Lily somewhere quieter that weekend, she said. Not a campground, somewhere off-grid. Did he know anyone out here? She shook her head. Not really, but he used to mention a man named Tom Leary, a park volunteer who lived near the trails. Said he'd helped Daniel fix his fishing boat once. That was years ago. The name rang faintly familiar. I dug into my notes. There it was, Tom Leary, age 57 at the time of the disappearance. Interviewed once in 1994. Said he hadn't seen the Millers. Claimed he'd moved out of the area that spring. But there was no forwarding address. When a man vanishes from the grid, it's either to find peace or to stay hidden. We reached the old service road by early afternoon. The forest was eerily quiet. Snowmelt dripped from the trees in slow rhythm. A mile in, the path forked. One side leading toward a ranger station, the other narrower, fenced by rotting posts and a faded no-access sign. The paint was almost gone, but the initials carved into the wood were fresh. LM. Claire froze. That's her, she said. Lily always signed her initials like that, with a little period. I knelt beside the post. The carving was shallow but deliberate, like a child's hand guided by fear, not play. And beneath the letters was a crude drawing, a crescent moon. I photographed it, heart pounding. In missing person cases, you learn to distrust coincidences, especially in forests that keep too many secrets. We followed the narrow trail. Fallen branches and debris made progress slow. At times, it felt less like a path and more like a scar through the woods. After 20 minutes, the trees opened into a clearing, and there it was, the outline of a cabin half collapsed, roof eaten by rot. Claire stopped dead. That's not his, she said. Daniel never owned property. Maybe it belonged to the man you mentioned, Tom Leary. She nodded weakly. He lived off-road, that's what Daniel said. Always talked about how quiet it was up here. The door groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and thick with mildew. A wood stove sat rusted in the corner, and beside it, an old metal cot with a torn blanket still on it. The walls were lined with photographs, not framed, pinned. Dozens of them, curling at the edges. Fishing trips, rivers, smiling families, strangers, every one of them taken near the same stretch of forest. Claire moved closer, scanning the faces. Wait, she whispered, reaching toward one. That's Daniel. And Lily. I stepped beside her. In the photo, Daniel stood near a riverbank, Lily holding his hand. But behind them, in the distance, half hidden by trees, was a man with a beard and a red flannel shirt. His face turned slightly from the camera. You know him? I asked. Claire shook her head. No, but that's not Daniel's photo. I've never seen it before. I flipped it over. On the back, a date written in fading ink, July 3rd, 1994. The same month written on the Polaroid from the Bronco, which meant someone had seen them alive after they supposedly disappeared. We kept searching. In a tin box beneath the cot, I found what looked like a journal. The first few pages were blank, water-damaged. But near the middle, the writing changed, smaller, uneven, almost childlike. He said we could stay until it's safe. But it's never safe. He watches the door. Dad says don't talk when he's near. I want to go home. Claire's hand covered her mouth. Oh, God! That's Lily's handwriting. I read the next line aloud. He keeps the radio on even when nobody talks back. The pages after that were torn out, like someone didn't want the story to continue. I set the journal down carefully. The back cover had something carved into it. A crescent moon and 3 vertical slashes. A symbol, not a doodle. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering pine needles across the porch. Something metallic clinked under the steps. I crouched and pulled out a rusted tin, a small locket, half filled with dirt. Inside was a picture of a little girl and a dog, both smiling into the sun. Was that hers? I asked. Claire nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. She wore it every day. I thought she lost it at the lake. I wrapped it carefully in a plastic sleeve. Evidence, yes, but more than that, proof that she lived beyond the point we all thought she'd vanished. When we stepped back into the clearing, the light had shifted. The forest looked older, heavier. Claire stood silent for a long moment before saying, Daniel wasn't the kind of man who'd run away. If he stayed here, it wasn't by choice. I agreed. The signs were clear: confinement, secrecy, someone watching. Whoever he was in that journal, he kept them here. And when they tried to leave, he'd buried the truth under roots and rain. But what chilled me most wasn't what we'd found. It was what we hadn't. There were no remains, no personal items beyond the locket, no sign of a struggle. Whoever lived here had packed up carefully, methodically, like they knew someone would come looking one day. We sealed off the site, log coordinates, and called it in for forensics. On the drive back, Claire stared at the horizon, mountains blue and endless. She spoke softly, like she was afraid the forest might hear. When I was pregnant with Lily, Daniel used to say he wanted her to grow up unafraid of the world, she said. He taught her how to camp, fish, climb. He believed nature was honest, that it never lied. She turned to me, eyes hollow, but I think it lied to him. That night, I spread everything out on my desk, the Polaroid, the journal, the locket. Each piece told the same story. Lily and Daniel didn't vanish in June. They were alive weeks later, maybe longer, and someone had been watching them all along. When I closed the file, a slip of paper fell from between the pages. A note I hadn't noticed before. It must have been tucked inside the journal. If anyone finds this, follow the moon marks. You can't hide them all. Beneath it, a rough drawing of 3 slashes arranged like trees and a crescent moon above them. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a message from a scared child. It was a map. And somewhere out there, among the pines, the next moon mark was waiting. The forest has a way of remembering things we forget. Paths overgrown, cabins reclaimed, secrets pressed into the soil until someone walks over the right patch of ground and wakes them. The day after we found the journal, I went back alone. Claire wanted to come, but I told her no, not yet. There were things in those woods I didn't want her to see first. I started from the cabin, following the direction the note suggested. Follow the moon marks. The carving outside, a crescent with 3 vertical lines, had been etched into a birch tree facing east. If the message was literal, then the next mark should lie somewhere beyond that ridge. By late morning, the fog was thick enough to swallow sound. The forest floor was soft, uneven, the kind that hides tracks even hours after they're made. I moved slow, scanning trunks, branches, rocks. Then I saw it, faint, nearly eaten by moss, another crescent moon carved into an aspen, smaller this time, with 2 slashes instead of 3. The spacing was deliberate, measured like coordinates only one person could read. I marked the GPS location. Each symbol, I realized, wasn't random. It was a direction. I followed the next bearing northeast, up a slope that bled into a cluster of boulders. At first glance, they looked natural, glacial deposits from long before we named this place. But between 2 of them, there was something unnatural. A rusted metal drum, half buried. Inside it, wrapped in canvas, were several objects: a broken lantern, a pocket knife, and a strip of fabric patterned with cartoon stars. I knew it before I touched it. The same pattern as the clothes in Lily's photos. My pulse climbed. The drum hadn't rusted evenly. Parts of it were clean, like someone had disturbed it recently. I snapped photos, bagged the fabric, and called the site in. It would take a team hours to reach me, so I kept going. The next moon mark was easier to spot. It was burned into wood, not carved, blackened, deliberate. Whoever left these signs wasn't just hiding. They were trying to lead someone somewhere. Around 1 p.m., I stumbled onto the remnants of a logging road, narrow, overrun with brambles, but still traceable. Old tire grooves cut through the mud like fossilized veins. It was the unregistered road the forestry records mentioned. I was sure of it. 100 yards in, I saw a metal post leaning in the dirt, a sign with faded lettering. I wiped away the grime and read the ghost of a name: Leary Timber Company. The same surname Claire had mentioned, Tom Leary. So he hadn't left the area in 1994. He'd been right here. The road led to an open lot swallowed by weeds and pine. 3 collapsed storage sheds sat at the edge, roofs caved in, boards blackened. I could smell the faint char of something long burned. And under the smell of ash, something older, earthier, metallic. Inside one shed, the walls were lined with hooks and chains. In the corner, a cot frame with no mattress. Carved into the floorboards, faint but readable, one word: run. My flashlight shook a little as I crouched to photograph it. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was recognition. I'd seen that same word before, carved into it in another case, another place. A survival instinct turned message. When I turned, I saw the 3rd moon mark on the beam near the door, crescent and single slash, each mark decreasing, counting down. 3 at the cabin, 2 on the ridge, 1 here. Whatever happened next, the trail ended at 0. Forensics arrived by late afternoon, and with them came Detective Harper, a younger officer from a new generation, sharp, impatient, eager to make sense of ghosts. Looks like a dumping site, she said, scanning the clearing. Burned out after the investigation closed. Whoever did this wanted to erase something. Not just erase, I said, pointing to chains. Control. She frowned. You think Leary did this? I think Leary ran this place. The question is, for who? We cataloged everything. Hooks, tools, rusted cans, fragments of a burned tarp. But under one collapsed beam, something gleamed. Harper lifted it carefully. A metal dog tag. The engraving was faint but legible. T. Leary, USMC. It was him. Except there was something else stamped below, barely visible beneath the scorch. Property of R&R Forestry Division. I'd never heard of it. Neither had she. We logged it and moved on, but my gut was already tightening. Private forestry firms don't mark tags like that. That's government or military-grade classification, meaning this operation, whatever it was, hadn't just been one man hiding in the woods. We headed back to the cabin as dusk fell. I told Harper pull every record on Leary from county archives, property deeds, employment, phone logs, anything. I had a feeling he wasn't off-grid by choice. People like him disappear because someone lets them. At the station, I spread out the photos from that day, the moon marks, the drum, the road, the shed. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold. Each mark / count, 3, 2, 1, matched the distance between them in miles. They were markers, a trail map in code. If I followed the sequence, the next logical point, 0, fell directly in a blank space on the forestry map. No listed structures, no clearings, just heavy elevation. But the shape of the terrain looked familiar. I overlaid the topography with old aerial images from 1994. There had been a small research compound there once, a temporary logging camp leased to a private contractor called R&R Forestry, Leary's employer. That was where the trail led. That was where it ended. Before I could file the expedition request, Harper came in holding a folder. "You're not going to like this," she said. She dropped it on the desk. Employment records from 1994. Leary had filed termination papers 2 weeks before the Millers vanished. But the signature on the form didn't match his. It matched Daniel Miller's. My pulse slowed. "You're saying Daniel signed his name?" "Same handwriting. Exact match." "But why would Daniel Miller sign as Tom Leary?" "Unless," she said, "he was being made to." I sat back, staring at the grainy photocopy. 2 names, 1 pen, and a timeline that shouldn't have overlapped. It wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was identity theft, coercion, or worse, a cover story layered over a man's disappearance. I pulled out the Polaroid again. The man in flannel, the one behind Daniel and Lily. Could that have been Leary himself? If so, why hide his face? And who took the photo? At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a forensics lab in Helena. They'd run the unknown fingerprints from the Bronco through deeper archives, including old federal contractor databases. They got a partial match. Not to Leary, not to Daniel. To a man named Frank Doran, a subcontractor for R&R Forestry, last active 1995. He'd disappeared without trace the same summer the Millers did. His last known location? The research compound site. When I hung up, the air in the station felt colder. The trail hadn't gone cold. It had been buried under official paperwork, sealed by silence. The kind only comes when people in high places have something to lose. The next morning, I packed my gear and drove north. The forest road twisted like a scar through the hills. Every turn brought me closer to coordinates the maps refused to show. By noon, I reached a ridge overlooking a valley smothered in mist. Down there, half swallowed by time, were 3 metal structures, weathered, overgrown, yet still standing. The R&R compound. I radioed Harper. "Found it," I said. Static answered first, then her voice distant. "Be careful, Sam. We still don't know who's connected to this." I left the truck, boots crunching through frost. The compound's fence was half collapsed. The main building door creaked open at my touch. Inside was silence, not the kind nature makes, but the kind that follows human absence. Desks overturned, file cabinets stripped, graffiti scrawled in red spray paint. But one thing remained untouched, a chalkboard on the far wall, coated in dust. And in that dust, drawn with a fingertip, the same symbol I'd been chasing, a crescent moon. Beneath it, a single 0, the end of the trail. I moved closer, heart pounding. The air smelled of damp and old smoke. Then I saw it. Faint writing etched beside the moon, almost erased by time. For words. He never left here. My flashlight flickered once, then went out. Somewhere deep in the compound, a door slammed. And in the echo that followed, I heard something impossible, a small, rhythmic sound, like metal tapping on wood. A pattern. 3 taps, pause. 2 taps, pause 1. The same countdown as the marks in the trees. Except this time, it wasn't a warning carved years ago. It was happening now. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began. 3 taps. 2. 1. Then silence. A silence that seemed alive. I stood in the dark for what felt like a full minute, listening. Wind whistled faintly through broken windows, but there was something under it. The faint echo of dripping water, rhythmic and deliberate. When my flashlight sputtered back to life, the beam cut across the room in a pale arc. The chalkboard loomed again, the crescent symbol ghostly in the light. And below it, something I hadn't seen before, a faint outline at the base of the wall, like a seam. I knelt, running my fingers along the concrete. It wasn't seamless. There was a hidden panel, maybe a maintenance hatch. A small padlock hung from its edge, so rusted it broke easily under my knife. When I pried it open, stale air rushed out, smelling of earth and metal. A ladder descended into blackness. I radioed in. "Harper, it's Rhodes. I think I've found an access tunnel under the main building. I'm going down." Static. Then her voice, faint. Copy that, but don't. The signal died before she finished. I clipped my flashlight to my jacket and started down. The rungs were cold, slick with condensation. The tunnel opened into a narrow corridor, reinforced with steel panels and wooden beams, like an unfinished mine. The air was colder here. Still, heavy. Every step echoed, not like sound bouncing back, but like something answering. About 30 feet in, I found a door on the right. The pane had peeled away, revealing a small metal plate. Storage, R&R Forestry Division. But someone had scratched through the word storage and carved something else above it. Safe. I turned the handle. The hinges groaned. Inside was a room barely larger than a closet, empty except for a desk, a broken lamp, and a stack of boxes stamped Evidence Archive, 1994. I tore one open. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Most were landscapes, rivers, tree lines, all too ordinary until I realized what connected them. Each photo had a small crescent mark inked in one corner, the same symbol that had haunted every stage of this case. The later photos were darker, empty campsites, abandoned cars, and people, half-turned faces, always caught mid-motion, unaware they were being watched. Near the bottom, one photo froze me in place. Daniel Miller, sitting on the steps of a cabin, face hollow, eyes fixed beyond the frame. And in the doorway behind him, Lily, clutching something against her chest. Her locket, the back of the photo read. Subject remains cooperative. Monitoring continues. Initials below it, FD. Frank Doran, the missing subcontractor. A scraping noise pulled my eyes up. Somewhere deeper in the tunnel, metal dragged against stone. I followed the sound, slow and careful, my hand instinctively resting on my sidearm. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. Floodlights, long dead, lined the ceiling. At the far end, a steel door with a warning label half erased by time. Authorized personnel only. The same words that had hung crooked at the compound's main gate. I pushed through. The stench at first, rot, mildew, and something sour like burnt plastic. Rows of rusted bunk beds filled the space, each chained to the wall. The floor was littered with empty cans, torn clothing, and bones too small to belong to animals. It wasn't a storage room. It was a holding cell. My breath caught when I noticed a far wall. Drawing scratched into the metal with something sharp. Childish scrawls, stick figures, crescent moons, and one phrase repeated over and over. He says we'll go home soon. The words got smaller each time, more frantic, until they blurred into scratches. At the center of the room sat a small wooden box. Inside, a tape recorder, portable, covered in dust. I pressed play. Static, then a faint voicemail. Calm, professional, July 10th. Subject remains stable. The man continues to resist instructions. The child compliant, but withdrawn. Leary's preparing relocation. During objects. I'll handle it. Then a sound. A door creaking. Footsteps. A small voice whispering something that made my stomach knot. Daddy says don't look. The tape clicked off. I stood there a long time. The compound wasn't a logging site. It was a containment facility. Someone had been running human trials or experiments, psychological, maybe survival-based, and the Millers had become part of it. But it wasn't government issue. Not officially. The forms, the logos, the missing records. It was all too sloppy for federal work. No, this was a private operation, one that used forestry contracts as cover. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something on the floor near the wall. A chain, still bolted to the concrete. At the end of it, a rusted name tag. D. Miller. I climbed back to the surface shaken, my throat dry as ash. Outside, the fog had thickened into a curtain. The world felt distant, muffled. Harper's SUV was parked near the compound gates. She stepped out as I approached, face pale. You look like hell. What's down there? I handed her the photo and tape recorder. Everything we thought we knew is wrong, I said. This wasn't just abduction. It was organized, monitored. She flipped through the photos, eyes widening. Jesus, this is evidence, I said. Enough to reopen the case. Maybe more. She nodded, still staring. Who would fund something like this? Someone who wanted to see how long people could survive when stripped of choice. We spent the next few hours cataloging what we could. The evidence boxes, the photos, the chain. But when we returned to the hatch, the one I'd come through, it was closed. The padlock, the one I'd broken, was back in place. Harper frowned. You lock it? No. Then who did? I shone my light around the clearing. Fresh boot prints led from the hatch to the tree line. Heavy, recent. Not ours. Whoever had been down there before me had returned. And they were still out here. We decided to pull out. The evidence was enough to justify a federal handover. And frankly, neither of us wanted to sleep near that place another night. But as I packed my notes into the truck, I saw something wedged under the windshield wiper. A piece of paper, damp from fog. 3 slashes drawn in black marker, and beneath them, a crescent moon. And a single line written in small, almost childish handwriting. You're following too close. That night, back at the station, Harper started digging into R&R Forestry's corporate filings. The company had dissolved in 1995, right after the Millers disappeared. Its owner of record? A shell corporation registered to an address in Helena that didn't exist anymore. But the listed project director did. Frank Doran. And the field supervisor? Thomas Leary. The 2 men we thought had vanished were the ones running the site, which begged the question, if they were in charge, who was giving them orders? The next morning, the photos from the underground room came back from digital enhancement. Most were too damaged to restore. But one frame, nearly invisible before, revealed something I hadn't noticed. A calendar pinned to the wall behind Daniel in the photo. July 1995. A full year after the case was closed. Meaning Daniel and Lily had been alive long after everyone had stopped looking. At the bottom of the calendar, written in red marker, were 3 words. When moon is gone. A date circled beside it, July 28th. That night, the moon had been new. No light in the sky. Perfect darkness. A perfect time to escape. I leaned back, the realization cold and heavy. The journal, the carvings, the countdown marks. All led to one night. The night Daniel and Lily had tried to run. The night the forest went silent. If they planned to leave, maybe they left a final marker, one no one had found yet. The only question was whether they made it far enough to be free when the darkness finally came. The forest looks different when you know what it's hiding. Every branch, every rock feels like part of a language you can almost understand. That's how it felt standing on the edge of Glacier Ridge again. Like the trees were whispering things they didn't want me to hear. The calendar date from the photo, July 28th, 1995, had become my compass. A night with no moon. The night Daniel and Lily Miller may have tried to escape. Harper and I pored over weather archives. Records showed heavy rain that evening, a flash flood warning near Flathead River, and a temperature drop that would have made survival nearly impossible without shelter. Yet the entry in Lily's journal had been clear. When the moon is gone, we'll go. They had a plan. They'd been waiting for that night. And something, or someone had been waiting for them. We returned to the compound. The underground tunnel had been sealed overnight by state investigators, but the outer grounds were still ours to search. Using Lily's moon symbols as reference, I overlaid a topographic map from the 1990s. Every carving site lined up along one trajectory, a perfect eastward path toward the river. If Daniel was leading his daughter, the route made sense. Dense cover, downhill gradient, and at its end, a narrow ravine that emptied into a tributary of the Flathead. If they made it that far, the water could have carried them miles away before daylight. We followed that path on foot. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of moss and thunder. Every so often, I'd find another mark carved into the trees. Crescents, fading but visible, pointing like arrows through time. After an hour, Harper called out, "Here!" She was kneeling by a rotted stump, brushing away leaves. There, buried in the soil, was a strip of fabric, blue plaid, still intact under the mud. Daniel's flannel. It wasn't torn. It was tied, knotted around a broken branch like a marker. He'd been leaving a trail for someone to find. I followed the direction the knot pointed. 30 yards ahead, the ground dropped sharply. At the base of the slope lay a collapsed wooden bridge spanning a dry creek bed, half of it given way, the other half swallowed by vines. And beneath it, something glinted in the light. I climbed down, a metal thermos, dented but sealed. Inside, folded tight, was a strip of notebook paper wrapped in wax. Harper helped me unfold it carefully. The writing was shaky but legible. If you find this, we're heading east. There's someone behind us. If Lily makes it to the river, follow the marks with no moon. Tell Claire she was brave. Tell her I tried. Daniel. Harper exhaled slowly. He was still alive when he wrote this. Alive and running, I said. The words hit harder than I expected. All these years, the world had assumed they vanished quietly. But Daniel hadn't gone quietly. He'd fought his way through every mile of that forest, carving hope into bark. We pressed forward, following the creek bed. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Not weather cold, but the kind that seeps into your bones when you know you're walking somewhere sacred. The stream curved east until it merged with a wide, flat basin littered with old rocks and fallen trees. At the center stood a ring of stones, blackened by fire. A campsite. We approached slowly. Char would still poke through the ash, long fossilized. A rusted coffee pot, half buried. And near the edge of the circle, something small and round glinting. A compass, engraved on the back. To Daniel, keep us found. It was the same compass Claire had mentioned in her original statement. A gift she'd given him before their last trip. Harper looked around. If they made it here, they stopped long enough to rest. I nodded, or to hide. Behind the campsite, a cliff wall rose steeply. Natural cover on one side, the creek behind. Good for protection, terrible for escape. We circled the perimeter until Harper froze. Sam, look. Halfway up the cliff, a ledge jutted out just wide enough to stand on. On its face, etched deep into the stone, was a crescent moon. No slashes this time, only the symbol itself, surrounded by a ring of small handprints pressed into the mud. The size of those prints made my stomach tighten. They belonged to a child. We called for excavation support. While we waited, I studied the pattern. The moon wasn't a countdown. It was a map in time. Each stage marking where they'd been before the moon disappeared completely. This last symbol, the full crescent with no slashes, was their final mark before the night of the escape. And just below it, someone had scratched 3 words into the rock. We almost made. The last word had been carved halfway, unfinished. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Harper's face said what we both felt, that whatever happened here, it ended violently. Still, there was no sign of remains, no bones, no blood. The forest had devoured its evidence too perfectly. By evening, the excavation team arrived with ground-penetrating radar. We scanned the basin. At 6 feet beneath the fire pit, the equipment pinged a dense anomaly metal. The techs began digging carefully. When the shovel struck something hollow, I crouched beside them. A metal case, scorched and half-collapsed. The latch gave easily. Inside was a camera, waterproof, early 90s model. Film still sealed inside. The brand matched one from the evidence photos we'd found in the underground chamber. Could this have belonged to Doran? Harper asked. Or Daniel, I said. Maybe both. We sent it back to the lab for development. But in my gut, I already knew that whatever was on that film wasn't going to be simple. That night, I visited Claire at her motel. She'd been waiting by the window when I knocked, like she knew I'd come with more pieces of the puzzle. I laid the thermos and compass on the table. She stared at them for a long time, not touching either. "He left these for me," she said finally. "Didn't he?" I nodded. "He tried to get her out. He got close." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Then why did anyone find them?" "Because they weren't meant to be found, I thought. Not by us. Not until now." But I couldn't say that out loud. When I returned to the station, the photo lab tech was waiting. He held a developed film envelope, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "There were 6 frames that survived," he said. "You'll want to see them." The first few were familiar. The cabin, the forest, the same woods we'd walked through. Then came the 4th image. A man standing near a truck, his face turned slightly from the camera. Leary, still alive. The 5th image was Daniel. Hands bound, face bruised, staring past a lens. And the 6th, Lily, sitting in a patch of grass, staring directly into the camera. Behind her, smoke. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands folded in her lap. And beside her, something barely visible, a shadowed figure crouching, holding the camera's remote shutter cable. A beard, a red flannel sleeve. Leary had taken the photo, and written on the bottom border in scrawl pen, "Before the rain took them." I spent hours staring at that picture. The rainstorm, the new moon, the final message, all converged on one night. But Leary's phrasing kept echoing. "Before the rain took them. Not before I took them. Not before they ran." The rain, as if the storm itself had done the work. I pulled satellite rainfall maps for that night in 1995. The flash flood zone reached the Flathead tributary, the same basin where we'd found the campsite. If they'd been trying to cross the river when the water rose, they might have been swept away. But if that were true, we should have found remains downstream. We hadn't. At 3 a.m., Harper called from the archives. "Sam, you need to see this. There's another report tied to that flood. A missing person not connected to the Millers." "Who?" "A forest ranger named Ruth Leary." I blinked. "Any relation to Tom?" "Sister. She went missing that same night. Filed weather reports until 10 p.m., then vanished." A ranger who vanished the night Daniel and Lily ran. The pieces clicked together like teeth. Tom Leary wasn't alone. Someone on the inside had tried to help, and maybe, just maybe, she'd helped him reach the river before the flood took everything. The next morning, I returned to site. Mist hovered low over the basin, the air sharp and electric. I walked to the cliff wall, where the final moon symbol was carved, and placed my hand over the unfinished words. "We almost made." Not a confession, not defeat. It was a promise left unfinished, because something interrupted it. Below, the creek gurgled quietly. I knelt near the fire pit one more time. Beneath the damp ash, something white caught the light, small, rounded, a tooth, child-sized, not human, animal. Beside it, a strand of blonde hair caught in a root. Lily's? Maybe. Maybe not. The forest wasn't done speaking. Not yet. That evening, the lab sent one last update. The last few frames on the camera roll were overexposed, but one image, heavily distorted, showed the outline of 2 figures standing near the riverbank. The timestamp on the edge read, July 28, 95, 11:54 p.m., the same night, just minutes before the flood. And faintly visible in the top right corner, a crescent moon swallowed by cloud. The last sliver of light before the darkness took them. I stared at that photo until dawn, not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. 2 figures. No pursuer. No captor. No monster in red flannel. Just a father and daughter, hand in hand, standing on the edge of water that would soon erase their trail forever. It should have been an ending, but somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't, because if the forest had truly taken them, It wouldn't have left a trail that clear or a story that deliberate. Someone wanted it found, wanted me to see it, and that someone was still out there, watching. There are nights that never end, nights that stretch across years, waiting for someone to finish the story that was cut short. For me, that night was July 28th, 1995, the night the moon disappeared. It had been months since the case reopened, and every lead felt like a faint echo from the same forest. But the deeper I went, the more I realized the Millers' disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a thread pulled from something bigger, older, and far more deliberate. The camera footage had shown two silhouettes, a father and his daughter standing near the river before the flood. But when the lab enhanced the frame, they found something else, a reflection in the water near their feet, a faint, distorted shape darker than the rest of the image. Another person standing behind them. That detail changed everything. If Leary or Doran were there that night, it meant the flood wasn't an accident. It was the cleanup. I went back to the R&R compound alone, against orders. The site had been fenced off, but someone had already cut through the wire. Boot prints trailed through the mud. Fresh. The hatch leading to the tunnels had been reopened. Inside, the air felt heavier than before, colder, wetter. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, pooling along the floor. The tunnel smelled like old earth and rusted machinery. But beneath that, something sharper. Gasoline. Someone had doused the place. I followed the scent until I reached the main chamber, the same room with the bunk beds and carved walls. Everything inside had been torn apart, boxes shredded, photos missing, chains removed. Whoever came here wasn't trying to destroy the evidence. They were retrieving it. On the far wall, someone had written a new message in fresh black paint. When the moon is gone, so are we. It wasn't a threat. It was a farewell. I swept my light across the floor and saw a set of muddy prints leading deeper into a side tunnel, one I hadn't noticed before. The entrance had been hidden behind a loose metal panel. It was narrower than the others, barely wide enough to crouch through. The tunnel sloped downward. The air thickened, humid. The walls changed from steel to rock. After 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves and sealed barrels. A generator sat in one corner, long dead, and at the center, a door, reinforced, padlocked shut. The same crescent moon symbol had been painted across it in white. No slashes, no countdown, just the moon, the final mark. I broke the lock with a crowbar and pushed it open. Inside was a bunker, dry, eerily intact. A single cot, a lantern still hanging from the ceiling, and on a crate near the wall, a cassette recorder identical to the one we'd found before. A label on the side read, Day 427 D. Miller. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed play. The tape hissed, then clicked. A voice filled the room. If anyone finds this, my name is Daniel Miller. My daughter's name is Lily. We've been here for over a year. They said it was for safety. They said the woods were dangerous, that we couldn't go home. But it wasn't about danger. It was about watching. Every day they made us live like ghosts. Every night they listened through the walls. Leary was kind, sometimes. But the other one, the one who gives orders, he's not. Lily's getting weaker. I told her when the moon is gone, we'll leave. Even if we don't make it, we'll die trying. If you find this, tell Claire I tried. Tell her I didn't let them take her. There was a pause, a breath, a click, and then another voice, faint, trembling. Daddy says don't talk when he's near. The tape ended. I sat in that silence for a long time. The truth had always been simple and terrible. They'd been prisoners, experiment subjects, and the people who kept them here had erased their own tracks before anyone could follow. But the last line of Daniel's message kept echoing. He didn't let them take her. If Lily hadn't been taken, where was she? The next day, we traced the flood line again, this time with sonar scans along the Flathead tributary. 3 miles east of the basin. The sensors picked up a submerged void, a collapsed section of old tunnel structure that hadn't been mapped before. The tunnel wasn't natural. It extended from the R&R compound itself, running beneath the ridge all the way to the river. That was their escape route. Divers went down. What they found turned the case from mystery to history. Inside the collapsed tunnel were 2 skeletons, preserved by the cold mud and lack of oxygen. One adult male, one smaller frame beside him. The man's wrist still wore a rusted chain fragment, identical to those from the compound, and around the smaller skeleton's neck was a locket, cracked but intact. Inside 2 photos, one of Claire, one of Daniel, smiling, holding a newborn girl. DNA confirmed it a week later. Daniel and Lily Miller. Claire didn't say much when I told her. She just sat quietly, holding the locket, as rain drummed against the motel window. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "They made it," she said. "Even if it killed them, they made it." She wasn't wrong. The forensics suggested Daniel had used the flood to cover their escape, breaking through a sealed service tunnel that connected the compound to the riverbed. He'd freed his daughter from the forest's grip, even if the water claimed them both in the end. Freedom at the cost of everything. A week later, we received another report from the cleanup team. When they drained the lower chamber of the compound, they found something wedged behind the generator, a wallet. Inside was an ID card. Not Daniel's, not Leary's, not Doran's. It belonged to a man named Gordon Ashcroft, listed as Field Operations Director, R&R Forestry Division. The photo matched a man who had testified in 1996 before Congress on a case involving private psychological field studies run without federal oversight. Ashcroft had vanished before sentencing. He'd been living under aliases for years. One of them, the name Frank Doran. The man giving orders hadn't disappeared. He'd simply changed faces. And someone, somewhere, was still helping him stay hidden. I handed my final report over to the Bureau 3 months later. They called it a closed investigation. Official cause of death, accidental drowning. Unconfirmed allegations of unlawful detention. No surviving suspects. Case dismissed. But I kept one thing, the tape. The sound of Daniel's voice was proof that sometimes truth exists only in whispers. On my last day in Flathead County, I drove back to the basin one final time. The floodwaters had receded, revealing the scar of the old creek bed and the stones of the Miller campsite. I walked to the cliff wall, to the place where Lily's last mark still lingered, the crescent moon carved into rock. The rain had softened its edges, but was still there, faint but unbroken. I set the recorder beside it, pressed play, and let Daniel's voice echo back into the trees. "When the moon is gone, we'll leave." Then I turned off the tape and looked up. The sun was setting behind a ridge, and for a brief moment, the clouds parted, revealing a sliver of pale white light breaking through the gray. A new moon rising. A second chance the forest didn't get to take from them. That night, back in my car, I found an envelope on the passenger seat. No postage, no fingerprints. Inside, a photograph. A modern one, color, clear. A young woman standing in front of a cabin deep in the woods. In her hands, a small silver locket. On the back, a single line written in neat cursive. "He didn't let them take me. Sign only, LM." Maybe it was a cruel joke. Maybe someone wanted to keep the story alive, to haunt the detective who couldn't let go. Or maybe, just maybe, Lily Miller survived that night after all. I still don't know, but I do know this. Some disappearances never end. They just wait, buried beneath the pines, for someone willing to listen when the forest finally starts to speak. And if you ever find yourself walking through Glacier Ridge and you see a crescent moon carved into a tree, don't follow it, because some trails don't lead back out.